There was a man named Taiwo who made the whole village tremble. Not from respect, but from fear. 3 wives he had married. 3 wives had run away, carrying bruises on their bodies and deeper wounds in their hearts. The first wife, Blessing, fled in the middle of the night with only her wrapper. The second, Patience, her own mother, came to rescue her after neighbors heard screaming through the walls. The third wife, Grace, lasted only 4 months before she disappeared like smoke. After each wife left, Taiwo would stand in the market square, tears streaming down his face, telling everyone how disobedient modern women had become. Some elders would nod their heads in agreement. Some women would whisper warnings to their daughters. But Taiwo always found another woman who believed his tears, who thought she could change him, who thought her love would be different. Then came the day when Ada arrived in the village from a distant town. The wedding was simple, held by the riverside where the water moved peacefully over smooth stones. Ada wore white cloth that caught the morning sunlight. She was soft-spoken, with kind eyes that seemed to see everything but judge nothing. Her movements were graceful, like a dancer or someone who understood their own body completely. Around her wrist, she wore a small leather band, worn and faded with time. When people asked about it, she would smile gently and say it belonged to her father. Taiwo stood tall during the ceremony, his chest puffed out with pride. To his friends, he whispered loudly enough for others to hear, "This one will know her place. She's quiet, respectful. Not like those others who thought they could challenge me." Ada heard these words but said nothing. She simply touched the leather band on her wrist, as if drawing strength from it. An old priest watching the ceremony leaned toward his companion and murmured, "One who knows iron does not fear the road." On their first evening together, Taiwo sat Ada down and explained the rules of his house. His voice was firm, leaving no room for questions. "Food must be ready before I ask for it," he said, counting on his fingers. "You do not speak unless I speak to you first. You do not receive visitors without my permission. You do not leave this compound without telling me exactly where you are going and when you will return." He paused, studying her face for any sign of resistance. Ada nodded slowly at each rule, her hands folded in her lap. But her eyes were different. They didn't show fear or submission. They held something else, something watchful and patient. As Taiwo spoke, his shadow stretched across the floor in the lamplight, long and dark. Ada's gaze lingered on that shadow, as if measuring it, understanding its true size. A gourd slipped from her hand and clattered to the floor. Taiwo's head snapped toward the sound. He stared at her for a long, cold moment before his lips curved into a smile that didn't reach his eyes. The first blow came 3 days later. Ada had been preparing evening stew when she was distracted by a bird singing outside the window. The bottom of the pot caught and burned, filling the kitchen with bitter smoke. Taiwo stormed in, his face twisted with rage. Without a word, his hand swung hard across her face. The slap echoed through the corridor like a crack of thunder. Ada's head snapped to the side from the force. Her cheek blazed with pain, already beginning to swell. But she didn't cry out. She didn't crumple to the floor as his other wives had done. Instead, she turned slowly away from him, her breath coming deep and steady, the way her father had taught her to breathe between wrestling rounds. In through the nose, out through the mouth. Finding center. Finding balance. She touched the leather band on her wrist with trembling fingers. Outside, the neighbor's young child pressed his face against the wall, listening. He heard the slap and whispered to himself what he'd heard before, another one. Another wife who will leave. The next morning, Taiwo's cousin Sandra arrived carrying a calabash of palm wine. She wore bright cloth and smiled too sweetly, like honey that had gone bad. "Sister Ada," she sang out, settling herself on a wooden stool. "Marriage is a long journey. You must learn to endure small storms to enjoy the sunshine." Her eyes flickered toward Taiwo with something knowing in them. When he was present, Sandra praised him loudly, calling him generous and strong. Taiwo responded by draping his arm around Ada's shoulders, speaking tender words he never used when they were alone. It was a performance, perfectly rehearsed. As Sandra prepared to leave, she laughed too loudly at something Taiwo said. On her way out, a small leather purse fell from her wrapper. Taiwo quickly scooped it up and returned it to her, but not before Ada glimpsed the coins inside, coins that bore the same markings as the ones in Taiwo's money box. The cousin's advice, it seemed, was not given freely. Peace, Ada realized, had a price that someone was paying. At the great market, Taiwo transformed into a different person entirely. He walked between the stalls tossing coins to traders, laughing loudly, slapping backs, and calling Ada, my precious jewel, for everyone to hear. Women gathered around them, admiring the couple. Your wife is so calm and dignified, they told Taiwo. You are blessed. He nodded proudly, as if her calmness was something he had created rather than something she possessed despite him. But one old woman, a meat seller with sharp eyes and strong hands, looked at Ada differently. She noticed how the young wife's smile never quite reached her eyes, how she stood with perfect posture even when others relaxed, how her breathing was controlled and measured. As Ada paid for meat, the old woman leaned close and whispered, you remind me of someone. A fighter's daughter, perhaps. There is something in the way you carry yourself. Ada's fingers froze for just a moment on the leather band at her wrist. Then she smiled politely and moved on, but the old woman's knowing gaze followed her through the market. That night, after Taiwo had drunk himself to sleep, Ada sat alone in the darkness. Carefully, she unwrapped the leather band from her wrist. It was worn soft from years of use, stained with old sweat and time. As she held it, memories rushed back like a flood. She saw herself as a small girl, no higher than her father's waist, standing in a training circle. Her father, Chief Daniel, was laughing, his voice deep and warm as he adjusted her stance. Balance is not strength, my daughter, he had told her, using his big hands to shift her feet into proper position. Balance is wisdom. Strength without wisdom is just violence waiting to hurt the wrong person. She remembered the smell of his sweat, the sound of his breathing, the feeling of being completely safe in his presence. Then she remembered the day they buried him, and how she had placed her training gloves in the ground with him, vowing never to fight again. The sound of footsteps broke her memory. Taiwo's silhouette appeared in the doorway. She quickly rewrapped the band and composed her face into stillness. The public humiliation came on a bright afternoon. Ada was crossing the courtyard with a pot of palm oil when her foot caught on a stone. The pot tipped, spilling precious oil across the ground in a spreading pool. Before she could even apologize, Taiwo's hand crashed across her face. This time, neighbors were watching. Children playing stopped their games. Women at the well froze with their calabashes half filled. Everyone saw. Everyone heard. But this time, something was different. Ada didn't stumble. Didn't cry. The blow landed hard enough to split her lip, but she stood firm as a tree, her feet planted, her body absorbing the impact without swaying. Her eyes, when she raised them to meet Taiwo's, held no tears, only a deep, measuring calm. Taiwo felt something shift in that moment, though he couldn't name it. An old man watching from his doorway muttered a proverb his grandfather had taught him, when the elephant walks, those with sense feel the ground tremble. That night, Taiwo came home drunk and angry about something that had happened at the palm wine bar. He found Ada preparing sleeping mats and decided she was moving too slowly. His hand drew back for another blow, this time aimed with more force than before. But this time, Ada's body remembered what her mind had tried to forget. Her hand moved without thought, pure instinct from years of training. She caught his wrist mid-swing, caught it so quickly and precisely that Taiwo gasped in shock. Before he could react, she twisted his arm behind his back in one smooth, controlled motion, the way her father had taught her to redirect an opponent's momentum. Taiwo's face pressed against the wall, his arm locked in a position that caused sharp pain without injury. His feet scrambled uselessly beneath him. For the first time in his adult life, Taiwo was completely powerless in his own home. "What manner of woman are you?" he whispered, his voice shaking with fear and confusion. Ada released him gently and stepped back, her breath still steady and calm. She said nothing, but everything had changed. The next day, Taiwo moved through his house like a confused animal. He would start to shout at Ada, then stop himself. He would raise his hand in that familiar threatening gesture, then let it drop. His body remembered the pain, remembered the helplessness, remembered how easily she had controlled him. But his pride was injured, and injured pride in a man like Taiwo is more dangerous than anger. That evening, he tried again. He grabbed her arm roughly, tried to push her against the wall. Within seconds, he was on the floor, staring up at the ceiling, confused about how he'd gotten there. Ada stood over him, not gloating, not angry, just present. "I do not want to hurt you," she said quietly. "But I will not let you hurt me anymore." Taiwo scrambled to his feet and ran from his own house, his face burning with shame. He ran straight to his cousin Sandra's compound, bursting through her door with wild eyes. "She's a demon," he cried. "Some kind of witch. You have to help me." Sandra's eyes gleamed with opportunity. Revenge, she knew, could be profitable. Sandra welcomed Taiwo with sweet words and sweeter palm wine. As he poured out his story, exaggerating, adding details, painting himself as the victim, she nodded sympathetically. But behind her concerned expression, calculations ran like numbers on a trader's board. "Cousin," she said slowly, choosing each word carefully, "you must accuse her before she accuses you. In the village court, whoever cries first is believed first. You must show your wounds, real or not, and make the elders see her as dangerous." Taiwo nodded eagerly, desperate for any solution that would return his power. "But such accusations require preparation," Sandra continued, holding out her hand meaningfully. "Witnesses must be found. Stories must be aligned. These things, they require resources." Taiwo pulled out his money pouch without hesitation, pressing cowries into her eager palm. Beneath the palm tree outside, hidden in shadows, a plan was born that would either restore Taiwo's control or destroy him completely. Neither of them considered which outcome was more likely. For 3 days, Taiwo prepared for his performance. He struck himself with a pestle where the bruises would show, arms, shoulders, even his face. Each blow hurt, but he told himself it would be worth it. He practiced falling dramatically, practiced crying real tears by thinking of sad memories and onions. He smeared ash on his skin to make himself look sickly and abused. In the corner of his room, watching through a crack in the doorway, was Samuel, the young boy who helped with household chores. Samuel was only 10 years old, but he had lived long enough to know truth from lies. He watched Taiwo hit himself and thought of all the times he'd had Ada crying at night. He thought of the genuine bruises he'd seen on her arms, the split lip, the way she moved carefully like someone in constant pain. Samuel's small hands clenched into fists. He was just a boy, powerless against men and their games. But he made a decision in that moment, watching Taiwo create false wounds while ignoring all the real ones he'd caused. Tomorrow, when they went to the elders, Samuel would speak. Even if no one listened to a child, he would speak. The evening before the hearing, Taiwo cornered Ada by the cooking hearth. The fire cast dancing shadows across his face, making him look demonic. "Tomorrow," he hissed, "I will make you pay for disgracing me. The whole village will know what you are. They will drive you out like the witch you are, and I will find another wife, a proper wife who knows her place." Ada continued stirring the pot, her movements calm and steady. When she finally looked up at him, her eyes held no fear. Only sad certainty. "Tomorrow," she said quietly, "the truth will speak for itself." Her voice was soft, but it carried a weight that made Taiwo step back involuntarily. That night, after he had gone to sleep, she unwrapped her father's leather band one more time. She held it against her heart, feeling the worn texture, remembering his voice, his lessons, his love. "Father," she whispered into the darkness, "I broke my promise. I fought again. But I fought only to survive." She tied the band carefully around her wrist. Tomorrow, she would need all her father's strength, not for fighting, but for standing. Sleep brought Ada a dream, vivid and clear as memory. Her father stood in the training circle, solid and alive, his laugh rolling like thunder across bright sky. She was a girl again, small and uncertain, trying to master a difficult stance. "My daughter," her father said, kneeling to her level, his big hands gentle on her shoulders, "remember this always, never fight to win. Fighting to win makes you cruel. Fight only to end pain, yours or someone else's. That is the warrior's true purpose." In the dream, young Ada asked, "But father, what if I'm afraid?" Her father smiled. "Fear is wisdom warning you to be ready. Only fools feel no fear. But courage is not the absence of fear, my daughter. Courage is knowing fear and standing anyway." The dream faded as a rooster's crow cut through the pre-dawn darkness. Ada woke, her father's words still echoing in her mind. She rose and washed, put on clean clothes, and braided her hair carefully. Today, the village would judge. But she was ready. Outside, the sun began to rise, painting the sky with colors like fire and hope. The elders' court was already crowded when they arrived. Taiwo came first, limping dramatically, his face marked with the bruises he had given himself. He wore torn clothes and moved like a wounded animal. Women gasped. Men shook their heads. Before anyone could speak, Taiwo fell to his knees in the center of the circle. "Elder Joseph." "Respected elders," he wailed, tears streaming down his face. "This woman beats me like a thief in my own house. She has used some evil power to turn everything upside down. I fear for my life." The crowd erupted in shocked whispers. Some people looked genuinely concerned. Others looked skeptical, they remembered his other wives. Ada entered quietly, her head high, her steps measured. She stood at the edge of the circle, saying nothing, her eyes fixed on Taiwo with an expression of profound sadness. Elder Joseph, the eldest and wisest, raised his carved staff for silence. His ancient eyes moved between husband and wife, seeing layers others missed. "Everybody quiet," his voice cracked like dry thunder. "Truth hides for a while, but eventually, it walks here. We will hear both sides." Before Taiwo could continue his performance, a small figure pushed through the crowd. Samuel, the young servant boy, his thin body trembling like a leaf in wind, stepped into the circle. "Elder," his voice was tiny but determined. "I must speak." The elders exchanged glances. Children rarely spoke in formal proceedings. But Elder Joseph nodded. "Speak, child. The smallest mouth can carry the largest truth." Samuel's words stumbled out quickly, as if he feared losing courage. "It was him, Elder. I saw everything. He hit himself with the pestle. He practiced crying. He planned all this with his cousin Sandra." The boy's finger pointed at Taiwo with unwavering certainty. "But I also saw the real bruises on Ada's arms, the nights she cried when he beat her. His wives before, they all left because of his fist, not their disobedience." The crowd's murmurs grew louder. Taiwo's face twisted with rage. He lunged toward the boy, hand raised to strike this small truth-teller. But 3 men caught him, holding him back. In that moment of rage, Taiwo showed everyone exactly who he truly was. An old woman from the market pushed forward, holding up a small ledger. She was the meat seller who had recognized something in Ada. "Elders," she called out, "I kept records of money changing hands. Taiwo has been paying his cousin Sandra for months, first to advise his wives to endure, then to spread rumors after they left. She opened the ledger, showing dates and amounts in careful script. The crowd pressed closer to see. Sandra, standing at the edge of the gathering, tried to slip away, but women blocked her path. Her face had lost all color, all pretense. The evidence was undeniable, a trail of coins leading to a trail of lies. Taiwo, seeing his plan crumbling, made a desperate gamble. He pointed at Ada, his voice rising to a shriek. She's a trained fighter. A demon woman who knows evil arts. How else could she overpower me, a man? In his panic, he had spoken the truth but framed it as accusation. The elders leaned forward with new interest. So the quiet wife had skills. This was unexpected, and the truth of the matter suddenly seemed more complex than a simple case of domestic violence. Elder Joseph turned to Ada. Is this true, daughter? Do you have fighting knowledge? Ada met his eyes steadily. Yes, elder. My father taught me. Some in the crowd suggested she demonstrate, prove she was dangerous, turn this into entertainment. But Ada's voice, when she spoke, carried a dignity that silenced the suggestions. Fighting is not entertainment, and I will not perform my father's sacred teachings like a market acrobat. She stood with her hands folded, her posture perfect, her presence commanding despite her small stature. I learned to fight, yes. But I also learned when to fight and when not to. I fought only when my husband would not stop hurting me. I used only enough force to protect myself, never to harm him in return. An old woman elder, Mama Ruth, squinted at Ada's stance, at the way she distributed her weight, at the leather band on her wrist. Recognition dawned slowly in her ancient eyes. Child, she said slowly, that wristband. And your stance? Who was your father? The courtyard held its breath, waiting for an answer that would change everything. Ada touched the leather band with gentle fingers, her voice soft with memory and pride. My father was Chief Daniel, the wrestling champion of the eastern villages. The crowd gasped. That name carried weight across multiple villages. Men who had been wrestlers themselves treated with respect, some had faced Chief Daniel in matches and lost honorably. Others had watched him compete, had seen his legendary skill combined with remarkable gentleness. Chief Daniel, an old man, breathed. I saw him wrestle once. He defeated 12 men in one day and helped every one of them up after, checking they weren't injured. That man had the strength of a lion and the heart of a healer. Other voices joined in, sharing memories. Everyone knew that Chief Daniel had died 5 years ago. Nobody had known he had a daughter, that he had passed his knowledge to her. Ada continued, when my father died, I buried my fighting gloves with him. I vowed never to fight again. But I never forgot what he taught me. Taiwo spat on the ground, his desperation making him reckless. So you planned this? You came here knowing what I was, planning to humiliate me. That night, after the hearing had been suspended until morning, Taiwo gathered 2 friends at a palm wine bar. Drunk and furious, he convinced them to help him teach his wife a lesson she wouldn't forget. The 3 men stumbled to Taiwo's compound after midnight, expecting to find Ada alone and defenseless. They found her awake, sitting calmly by lamplight, as if she'd been expecting them. Leave, she said simply, her voice carrying no fear. Leave now, and no one gets hurt. The men laughed. 3 against 1. What could she do? But within minutes, all 3 were on the ground, groaning, confused about what had happened. Ada had moved like water, redirecting their clumsy attacks, using their own momentum against them. Not one bore a serious injury, but all 3 felt the clear message. She could have hurt them badly if she'd chosen to. Suddenly, a whistle pierced the night. Someone had run to alert neighbors. Within moments, people poured from their compounds carrying torches, surrounding the scene. They saw 3 men sprawled in the dirt, Ada standing unharmed, her breathing barely elevated. By dawn, the whole village had gathered in the square. Women who had remained silent began speaking, their voices overlapping with years of suppressed truth. "We saw the bruises on Blessing," one said. "But we told ourselves it was none of our business." Another, "We heard Patience screaming. We closed our windows instead of our doors." More voices, a chorus of confession. "We knew. We all knew what he was." But saying nothing felt safer than speaking up. The weight of collective guilt hung in the air like morning mist. These women had survived by staying silent, by turning away, by telling themselves that other women's pain was not their responsibility. Now they saw what their silence had cost. Young wives looked at older women with questions in their eyes. "Why didn't you warn us? Why didn't you stop him?" The older women had no good answers, only shame. Elder Joseph's voice cut through the murmurs. "The sun reveals what darkness hides. Tomorrow morning, we will judge this matter fully before the chief himself. Let everyone bring what truth they have been holding." That night, nobody slept well. Truth was coming, and it would spare no one. At first light, women gathered at Taiwo's compound and opened his locked storeroom. Inside, they found evidence of years of violence, heavy sticks with dark stains, torn wrappers belonging to his ex-wives, a pestle with fresh blood from where he'd struck himself. But most damning were personal items, jewelry, cloth, cooking pots, things his wives had left behind in their desperate flights, things he'd kept like trophies. One woman found a small door, hand-sewn, that had belonged to Blessing's daughter. The child had left without even her favorite toy because the escape had been so urgent. Tears fell as women remembered that night, the mother running with her child, leaving everything behind just to survive. The items were carefully gathered and brought to the square, laid out where everyone could see. Each piece told a story of fear, of pain, of women who had been dismissed and blamed. The physical evidence spoke louder than any testimony. When the elders arrived and saw the display, even the most skeptical among them understood. One elder lifted a torn wrapper slowly, his hands trembling. He said nothing, but his silence spoke volumes. In the chief's square, with the chief himself present, the final judgment took place. The evidence lay spread before everyone, the items from the storeroom, Samuel's testimony written down, the ledger showing payments to Sandra, statements from neighbors and ex-wives who had finally found courage to speak. Taiwo knelt in the center, no longer performing, his shoulders slumped with the weight of undeniable truth. Ada stood before the chief, her voice soft but clear. "Great chief, I fought only when my husband would not stop. I used my father's teachings not to harm, but to protect. I wanted peace, tried submission, tried patience. When those failed, I defended myself. That is all." The crowd began to chant, their voices rising together, "Truth stands. Truth stands." The chant grew louder, became a wave of sound washing over the square. The chief raised his hand for silence. He conferred with his elders in low voices, their heads bent together. Minutes passed like hours. Finally, the chief spokesperson stepped forward to announce the verdict. Every person leaned forward to hear justice pronounced. The verdict came in measured tones. Taiwo must provide restitution to all 3 ex-wives, whatever remained of their possessions plus compensation for their suffering. He must make public apology to each woman, naming his wrongs specifically. 7 years of community labor was assigned. He would serve under the Women's Council, doing whatever work the women he had shamed deemed necessary. His cousin Sandra was fined heavily for her role in enabling abuse and spreading lies. The money would go to establishing a safe house for women fleeing violence. Taiwo's compound was stripped from him, given to the Women's Council to house those in need. The watching crowd nodded approval, justice that fit the crime, punishment that served the community. Then the elder turned to Ada, his expression gentle. And you, daughter of Chief Daniel, what will you do now? This marriage has brought you only suffering. Our customs allow you to live without shame. Ada stood silent for a moment, looking at the leather band on her wrist, at the people gathered, at the path forward. Her answer, when it came, would define not just her future but offer hope to others watching. Ada stepped forward and carefully untied the leather band from her wrist. She held it up so everyone could see it, this simple piece of worn leather that had carried her father's memory and given her strength through the darkest nights. She placed it gently before the elder's feet. "Respected elder," she said, her voice carrying across the silent square, "I have ended my father's unfinished fight, but I ended it with peace, not with more violence. This band has served its purpose. Now it can rest." She looked back at Taiwo, still kneeling, broken in ways bruises could never show. "I pray you find what you need to heal, but I cannot be part of that journey. Some lessons must be learned alone." With grace and dignity, Ada walked away from the square, away from Taiwo, toward the river where her wedding had taken place. Her head was high, her step steady, her spirit free for the first time in months. Behind her, Taiwo was given a bucket and cloth, beginning his sentence by washing the stones of the square while women stood watching in silence. The proverb elders would repeat for generations came from Elder Joseph: when a man plants stones, he should not cry when his feet bleed. And children would ask their parents, when silence finally breaks, who truly wins, the loud or the steady? The answer lived in Ada's walk toward freedom, in her courage to both fight and forgive, in her wisdom to know which battles end in victory and which simply end.